The last name, Hoover, is, if I can use this term, a brand name in conservative circles. Herbert Hoover was, as you probably know, the 31st president of the United States who served during the Great Depression. In fact, taking office in 1929, the year the stock market crashed. That's probably an apt historical reference for today, perhaps, since the economic implosion we are living through is the worst in a century, dating back at least to the Great Depression of the 1920s and 1930s. Hoover's great-granddaughter is Margaret Hoover, and Margaret has kept the Hoover flame alive, both in her attention to Herbert's legacy and her own work as a conservative commentator. Among other platforms you would catch her on is that she's now the host of Firing Line, the PBS public affairs show that was hosted for decades by, in fact, the conservative William F. Buckley. Margaret and I have known each other since the 2016 election cycle. We have vigorous, but respectful disagreements about actual policy. As you can gather from this clip from a CNN exchange we had while we were on the set on Don Lemon's show, awaiting the vote on the so-called skinny repeal of the Affordable Care Act in 2017.
If you guys remember, I mean, I know you all remember, but like, let us also just remember that when Nancy Pelosi passed the bill through the House of Representatives, remember she said the 2,000 pages that people had less than 24 hours, 72 hours to read, we have to pass it in order for you to figure out what's in the bill, right?
But Margaret,
this is what happened. Not justifying it. Well, no, hold on. There was I understand there were a lot of differences, and I'm not justifying this process.
No, but a major difference was there were many hearings. It was very fleshed out. Here you had a process where a bill that nobody had read, when there were no hearings, zero hearings by the Republican leadership. We're all we've watched all this congressional process. Usually what happens is somebody offers a bill and they say, okay, let's dispense with the reading. They had to read the entire bill when it was introduced about 2 hours ago because there was no physical copies in the hands of everybody.
Yeah, at least it was in 2,000 pages, and at least they can read it.
But,
okay, and then it is a slimmed down version, and what it is it's reforming specific elements that we're all talking about now. It's about the individual mandate. We're talking about Medicare expansion. We're talking the things that we're talking about, the components we're talking about are components that we've all been talking about. There's nothing that we can tell right now is new.
But our disagreements never get personal. So I figured in the wake of the two parties' political conventions, and as a reminder, I was a Bernie delegate this year to the virtual Democratic convention, it would be a good time to connect with Margaret, who, not exactly to my surprise, reveals here for the first time publicly, with my gentle nudging, that she's voting for Joe Biden. Which says as much about Biden's politics as it does about Margaret, right? And that the battle progressives face is going to be fierce should there be a Biden administration. So wait for Margaret's reveal towards the end of our chat. One of the things that struck me, Margaret, as we begin our conversation is that we differ on a lot of the policy stuff over several years that we've known each other. We've had great conversations about this. But there's one place where I think that we actually share a commonality, which is where we place ourselves now in our respective parties. I'm on the outs, if I can say this, or it's certainly I'm not in the controlling majority of the mechanics of our party, the leadership of our party. Obviously, the Joe Biden wing, the centrist wing is more dominant. The Bernie Sanders wing is not. And in your world, you basically have a situation where I'm guessing you feel pretty much on the outside of your party, or at least Trump's running the show there. Is that a fair comparison?
I appreciate the premise. I don't agree with it. And here's why. While I am certainly on the outskirts of my party, I think that it is, we may feel that we are not in the center part of our party. That's true. I agree with you there. But we are asymmetrically pushed out from the center of our party. And let's just take Bernie Sanders. I mean, the man about whom you wrote a book, by the way, that's a great book over your right shoulder, and for whom you worked and whose positions you espouse, gave the major and probably the most effective, next to Michelle Obama and Joe Biden himself, speech at the Democratic Convention a few weeks ago. There is, let me just be very clear, not a single person who espoused the ideas that I adhere to at the Republican convention on the stage. So and it, just to be for your listeners who might not know, I'm sort of this old kind of Republican that believes that we should tackle climate change and tackle immigration reform. Actually, you and I probably really disagree on immigration reform. Wants to grow the party, have sincere criminal justice reform, have sincere racial reconciliation. Recognizes that a new set of problems need to be addressed by a new generation, and wants to think critically about how to do that in a way that is most consistent with the growth of markets and the sort of, I would say, fair distribution of the goods, but that is not distributed through the government, but distributed through a means of the markets. An opportunity society with a safety net is a catchphrase that I still believe in, and I don't know. There are few people that are kind of like old Republicans that haven't been stamped out of the party, but they're definitely in hiding. And there just doesn't seem to be a place for them in Trump's Republican Party, which is what this party is. This is Trump's party.
So this gets to my second question and my second point, which you may vigorously disagree with. See, I don't buy this notion that this is, quote unquote, very different from the Republican parties of the past, other than Trump's insanity, the fact that he's a hardcore narcissist, that he's, I think, stark raving mad, he's abusive, and all the things we know about him. Because if you look at the policies, if you put aside for a moment the vast number of Republican legislators, for example, the people who are in the party who have stood with him, they've done so partly because of fear, right? Because obviously if Trump decides to oppose you in a primary, you're mostly could be toast. But on policy, he's basically delivered the very things that Republicans have wanted going back to Reagan: tax cuts for the rich, huge increases in Pentagon spending, bad trade deals from my point of view. You got a Supreme Court justice, two of them, who are no different than Clarence Thomas, who was nominated, back in the day. So tell me why I'm wrong that the Republican Party is in fact the same Republican Party, with the exception that you've got somebody who's a lunatic in the White House.
Yeah, I mean, I could sort of add a little bit of texture and nuance to it, but I think you're right in that there are major things that the base of the conservative movement and the Republican Party has wanted for many, many years. And while Donald Trump was never the person that they would have picked to be his their savior when it came to appointing conservative Supreme Court justices, they have been elated and happily surprised and delighted that Donald Trump has delivered for them. And that, I think, is the case also when it came to the tax cuts. Look, I think the real conservatives, or not the, I don't want to say the real conservatives, though some aren't conservative, but the people who really most closely align themselves as fiscal conservatives, consistent with that tradition going back to Reagan, had a lot of quibbles with the way the tax cut was put together. That that it didn't really, the thing that Republicans and conservatives, you really want to get in the nuance, had said for years and years and years, is that you had to completely restructure the tax system. You had to simplify it. You had to have, 3 different levels. None of that happened. It ended up just being sort of a cronyistic giveaway to, the loudest factions in the Republican coalition. In many
Well, the
ways.
whole theory of supply side economics is, to me, phony. And it wasn't just about the Reagan tax cuts. It was also then followed up by the George W. Bush tax cuts, which followed the same playbook. So if you look back over 40 years, I'm just going back just to the Reagan years, to now, on policy, Trump has delivered for the vast wide swath of the party. So is
There's
the objective
places he's diverged.
Okay.
The trade stuff. He is far more. His instincts are far more protectionist than the thrust of the Republican Party or the muscle memory of the Republican Party, the conservative movement. I know you think the USMCA was a bad deal, but most people end up thinking it just updated NAFTA in ways that NAFTA needed to be updated. And I appreciate that
NAFTA was bad.
I appreciate that you have that view. But I don't think his instincts, the main part about Donald Trump is that his instincts aren't actually, they're instincts. They're not a deeply held set of beliefs or principles that guide the way he thinks about policy or thinks about America's positioning in the world. They're just It's just what he thinks is going to be good for him.
But fundamentally, then, my question from your perspective, and as you look across the political landscape, is the main objection to many people who oppose Trump, who have publicly come out against him, is that what he's doing is essentially driving away tons of voters because of his personal behavior, the way he's incompetently handled, I think you'd agree, the pandemic, that he's driving those folks away, not because the Republican Party should be different in the view of some of these people. It's that he's driving away people who would support what, as I just said, what we've discussed, has been true for 40 years about what Republicans want.
Look, I think it's fair. I think my framing would be a little different, but I understand what you're saying, and I think the reason Republicans have stuck around for the most part, and that is the majority of Republicans have stuck around with Donald Trump, despite the extraordinary character vulnerabilities, despite the terrible behavior, despite the, frankly, potentially quite unlawful behavior, is that they want to get the same things done that they've stood for many years. So I think I think I'd take the inverse, maybe describe it a little differently, but I don't have any serious quibbles.
And I want to hone in on one specific thing, and I think this is going to be somewhere where you're going to feel not in the Republican Party mold, and that's about race. Donald Trump is a hardcore racist. We know that. That's been his history. But no one spoke up in the Republican Party. And when I say no one, I didn't hear many voices speak up when George Herbert Walker Bush used Willie Horton, an explicitly racist message, to defeat Michael Dukakis. I didn't hear, as far as I remember, a single Republican object to the way Jesse Helms used racism against Harvey Gantt in the 1990 Senate reelection campaign. And you just go through all those aspects where racism has been a fundamental tool that Republicans have used. And Donald Trump is almost the id. He's more explicit about his racism. So how do you grapple with
racism,
that?
I don't grapple with it. I'm deeply uncomfortable with everything the party is and stands for at the moment. But one of the things that Donald Trump has really helped us understand, or helped me understand, is and shed light on, is just how complicit Republicans have been in playing the race card for so long. And it's not that we didn't know the history. It's not that we didn't know that in 1964, Barry Goldwater refused to support the Civil Rights Act. And after that, he won Arizona and all the South, and the South flipped, right? We knew that. We knew that. But the truth is, it's just become so pronounced and impossible to not see in the current context. And as you have a population that's changing, demographics are destiny. I do believe that. I think that's been poo-pooed by conservatives. But, I wrote a book 10 years ago saying if the Republican Party doesn't reach out, look, at that time, 10 years ago, the millennial generation was 40% non-white. I was like, guys, we got to do something here, right? And it's only gotten worse since then. But race is a fundamental key issue in this country. We are desperately in need of racial reconciliation and really, truly coming to terms with the fullness of American history in a way that doesn't need to be, it needs to be honest, and it needs to be fair. But it should also, it's delicate. It's really, really delicate. And we need to be thoughtful and nuanced about it. And instead, the party has doubled down on the darkest traditions in our politics around race. And you even see it with Kanye West supposedly considering a presidential run and trying to apparently get on the ballot in certain key states. I mean, that is, as Stuart Stevens, a longtime Republican operative and campaign chair of Mitt Romney's, campaign manager of Mitt Romney's presidential campaign, wrote in his book, "It Was All a Lie." It's the oldest play in the book. You get an African American to get on the ticket to siphon away, or votes that would have gone to the Democrat, so that the Republican gets over the top. And that's what the Kanye West play is. So it's the Republican Party, I don't think it is capable of really coming to terms with race in its current constitution.
Now, here's a question that's maybe a little less about both parties in the mechanics of it, but I want to hear your view about whether you're sensing what I'm about to describe. It seems to me that the pandemic, the horror of the pandemic, may changed the country for good, from my point of view, in big, big ways. And I want to explain why briefly and see what your thought about this. Millions of people all of a sudden have come right up against the failures of the economic system, the free market system, the ways in which government has been attacked, and certainly by Republicans, but by some Democrats, frankly. Let's face it, it was Bill Clinton that came into office and said the era of big government is over, which many progressives, someone like me, for example, will never forgive him for. I've never voted, I'm proud to say, I've never voted for Clinton. In all the years when he ran for president and when Hillary ran, I quietly cast my ballot for somebody else in 2016 in the privacy of my booth. But what's happening, I think, is millions of people who could not stay home because we don't have paid sick leave, for example, when they were sick with the coronavirus. The millions of people who are the so-called frontline workers who are going to work and getting sick because we actually don't have a robust safety and health system. The millions of people who are now struggling without unemployment benefits because on a good day, the unemployment system has been broken and rickety. And so I'm wondering actually whether we're looking at an era of really robust government. We progressives, Democratic progressives, are going to have to fight with the Biden administration, should there be one, about that. But do you see that, looking from a conservative point of view, what you hear from Republican voters, that people are now thinking about government differently?
Well, it depends who you talk to on the right. I hear your argument, and I hear the hope sort of weaving itself into your projection that perhaps
it
everybody sees this largesse in terms of government spending on the public and says, hey, this isn't that bad. Let's just do universal health care. You and I are never going to agree on how we get to universal health care. I'm never going to be in a single, I'm never going to support sort of this single payer model in order to get there, although I do believe, and I do think there are some really innovative and really good solutions to getting us very near universal health care that are not done through the government entirely, at least. I think there's hybrids, and of course, there is a role the government plays. Frankly, the government already administers 1/3 of the country's healthcare anyway between the VA, Medicare, and Medicaid. So it would be a hybrid model if I had my dream. But you and I are never going to, I think, agree on that. I think it depends on who the successor to this president is. If this president has a second administration,
God forbid.
I do think there will be a real reckoning with just the sheer sum of funds that have been spent by the Treasury and printed, frankly, by the Treasury. And I know that there is an economic view that modern monetary theory that suggests that we really need not worry that much about how much we're spending, as long as we control the printing presses. And I think that we should have a really robust debate about that in this country, because I think if Trump wins re-election, we stand to. I think if Biden wins, I think that conversation will be happening within the context of the Democratic Party, and you will have a real platform to advocate for that position.
Well, wouldn't it be smart? Just rather than make it macro, shouldn't we have, like every other country, paid sick leave for folks so that when you have a virus, you can actually stay home and not worry?
The effect of that, I think we should absolutely have the effect of it. I think there's a lot of different ways to administer it, right? If you're in Rhode Island, is it Rhode Island, New Jersey, and California? There's every time you take a job or you pay into, an insurance plan, basically a policy that allows you to take paid sick leave or family leave for 12 weeks at any point, whenever you want. It's not because you get, you can have a sick parent, you can have a sick whatever. And, so there are different mechanisms for ensuring that you have this kind of coverage. I don't think we have to be like every other country in terms of how they administer. And by the way, every country does do it a little differently.
Yes, and so I would take Denmark as an example, or I could pick other examples like Australia, actually, where I lived. So I'm not really talking about a socialist country.
I know.
Although Australia has a vigorous background and a vigorous history of socialism and Labor Party activism. That's why they have national health care, which even the conservatives don't want to unwind in Australia, because they know as an economic matter, it makes sense not to have the burden on businesses, which would make them non-competitive. But in Denmark, people say Denmark is where people feel the happiest. If you took that, World Happiness Index and looked at it, and all those things we just talked about, folks have paid sick leave, real unemployment, and health care. You're shaking your head. That's a
I'm
fact.
interceding. It is. I'm sure that is a fact. But Denmark has a population of like less than 8 million people, right? How many people does Denmark have?
I don't remember, but it's smaller, obviously, than the United States.
Let's call it smaller than Colorado, which is 8 million people. It is
But-
significantly smaller than, but here's why. It's also a more homogenous population, right? It is mostly white and is mostly descended from, I don't know the exact, lineage of it. I would make a joke about them being descendants of the Nordic, but the point is that it's a more ethnically monolithic population and a smaller population, and it's really, really difficult to go apples to apples with.
Why does that matter that they're
incredibly
homogenous?
Because it's because
by race or something else, because all races, no matter who you are, need
deserve to have
paid sick
healthcare,
leave.
for sure. Absolutely. No, but what I'm saying is administering healthcare to 350 million people of enormously diverse backgrounds, enormously diverse genealogies, enormously diverse health conditions and circumstances. And by the way, we have a lot of poverty in this country. We have a lot of people with underlying conditions and comorbidities that are, by the way, African-American and Latino, who are disproportionately affected by COVID, that our healthcare system, to your very good point, has not helped take care of.
Well, but,
and has not served. So look, you and I are never going to agree. I am never, ever, ever going to agree on a one-size-fits-all healthcare system, and that the federal government should pay for it.
Even though Medicare is so efficient, 2 to 3%
I love that you say that Medicare is efficient.
But it's true.
I know that you
compared
think that.
to the private sector.
So we're going to have a healthcare debate here. Here we go.
No, but actually, I didn't want. I actually just wanted to make that point.
We can do that. We should have a real healthcare debate. Let's have a real healthcare debate. I'll come more prepared for it next time. But look, I mean, you and I have also seen the studies that the outcomes on Medicare, as opposed to the outcomes on private healthcare, they're not the same. The outcomes, they're just not. I'll bring all of my statistics next time.
All right, we'll have a debate on Medicare. Let me move to a bigger question. So, as the great-granddaughter of a famous president, Herbert Hoover, one of the things that has been true over many, many decades is the sense of American exceptionalism, that the United States of America is somehow special in the rest of the world, something that I've never believed, having lived around the world and lived in other countries. I always thought that was something that we lorded over the rest of the world. I wonder if you think, as a conservative, looking at the world and the way in which the world looks at us now in the current pandemic, that has really been shattered in many ways. That for many people, frankly, around the world, they didn't believe that. But even countries who had this affinity for the United States and looked to it for leadership think differently now about that.
So I think it depends on how we sort of define American exceptionalism, what you think makes the country exceptional or not. I don't think Americans just by birthright are better people than Australians, or as what President Obama said, there's nothing. What did he say? There's nothing special about sort of Greek exceptionalism or whatever. I mean, the thing that Egyptian exceptionalism, whatever. There was a line he used when he was addressing the public in Egypt that he took a lot of flack for from conservatives. I can't remember the exact quote, but no, I don't think I'm inherently better or you're inherently better than a mom who's a 40-something mom in China or Africa or India.
By the way, I fault Democrats for this as well.
But
Robert Reich has been one of the great promoters of, if everybody has skills here in the United States, we'll outcompete people because we're the best workers, which I just don't believe.
Okay, so what I think, to put a finer point on what you call American exceptionalism, and was really key to the philosophy and core to the philosophy of Herbert Hoover, because he was a frontier orphan of no means, who was orphaned at the age of 9, and somehow by luck and a little bit of circumstance got his way into the pioneer class at Stanford University, worked his tail off, had no money, $40 to his name when he graduated, and within a decade was a self-made millionaire. By the way, by way of Australia. Just to make it fun, because
I didn't know that.
He discovered mining properties on behalf of his wealthy British mining investors in Perth, Australia.
Which is a real dump,
Hoover
by the
said. Well, you would have imagine it in 1891. Yeah. Hoover's experience, and I think the genuine experience still remains to be the case, is that there is an ability. This country still creates opportunities for people who are born with no advantage. And by the way, this hasn't been true universally. It doesn't mean that every child who is born in poor circumstances has the ability to become Jay-Z, right?
Especially if you're not white. Yeah, but mostly if you're not
white. Well, that's
white.
why I said Jay-Z. That's why I said Jay-Z, right? Like, but it does still happen here, right? Mm-hmm. And it's also the place where people come from other countries in order to make their ideas into something that does change the world. I'm looking at, Sergey Brin. And so there is something extraordinary and exceptional here that is a bit different than anywhere else. And it's not universally available, but our work in this country is to make the ideals of the Declaration more and more true and more broadly available to more and more people through each generation. Mm-hmm. And so I refute the idea that there isn't something that is extraordinary about this country. And I'm not saying you or I are better than anyone else. I think we're damn lucky that we were born here.
Okay, we should take that up again some other time in a conversation, because I have some deeper thoughts about that. Now, here's the last question I kind of want to ask you. So, are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
I never told anyone who I voted for, but I am not going to vote for Donald Trump.
And are you going to vote for Joe Biden? Are you one of these long list, either publicly or in your own heart, of all these Republicans who both were featured at the Democratic convention are coming out in letters saying they're going to vote for Joe Biden?
I believe it's a binary choice. I do. I know that you don't, because I know you wrote. I don't know what you did last time. Did you vote for Donald Trump last time?
No, I wrote in Bernie Sanders.
You wrote in Bernie Sanders. So you said you never voted for Clinton.
But let me be clear. I did, and you will know this because you and I were on panels together after the convention was over. I continued to appear on CNN, and underneath my name was Clinton supporter, which of course made me feel ill.
That's a great way to just send you through the roof.
Yeah, well, it made me feel ill, but, and this is to the point about now, I did believe that it was very important to defeat Donald Trump in the same way that I believe that is true now. So go ahead, keep I
thought I had a lot of friends who lived in states that were important swing states. And they could never bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton. And I persuaded, I had one in particular. Here's what I'll say. I do think it's a binary choice. Perfect is not on the menu. Nobody is going to be your ideal candidate. You can't dream somebody up out of nothing that's going to be the perfect candidate. So you do have to pick between a series of bad choices. And I can't bring myself to vote for Donald Trump. And while I disagree, and I'm quite concerned, frankly, about the battles that will ensue between your wing of the Democratic Party and Joe Biden and the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party, I am very interested in those battles and hoping that I can contribute somehow to them coming out right, and to really engaging in the debates that we will have if Joe Biden wins about, what is the appropriate tax rate, and what is the appropriate reforms to healthcare, and what are the trade negotiations that be ensuing, and how should we engage with China or not engage with China, and all the other really important sets of policy issues that will be very different if Joe Biden wins, because he'll have to work it out within the context of presumably a Democratic majority in the Senate and a Democratic House.
So you will be casting your vote for Joe Biden?
I will quite likely be casting my vote for Joe Biden.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. You're welcome back anytime. We should debate healthcare and American exceptionalism, probably after the election, but it'll be a good time to revisit all this. Thanks always for chatting with me, Margaret. Love your thoughts.
Thanks, Jonathan Tassini.